Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Spark of Genius Flesh and Blood production. And we have another hero spotlight, hero profile, hero, whatever you want to call it. Maybe a deep dive, deep dish pizza, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
And we're going to be going over Prism, the sculptor of the Arclight. And so this is going to be if you've watched any of our other hero profiles, it's going to be a breakdown of not necessarily like a deck tech per se, although we will have cards out here to illustrate kind of uh, the details of what we're trying to express with some of these topics. But other than that, it's just going to be a rundown on the hero herself in this particular case,
Hmm.
equipment, different builds, who might like playing her, the play styles, all that kind of good stuff. And
Yeah.
so I'm going to pass it on to Rob, my co-creator, co-commentator,
Hmm.
co-caster, co-compatriot,
Hello.
who's gonna take the role of the host on,
That's
and I'm
right.
going to be the
I've
role
got
of the guest here.
all the questions for you, Eric. Yeah.
Good.
So just like
I didn't
most of
make
the
it. I didn't make
other,
these.
yeah, just like most of the other hero profiles we're doing, we're going to go through a
Mhm.
series of questions for Eric. Eric has quite a bit of experience playing Prism, which is why he's kind of taking the wheel on
Quite a
this.
bit is it's all relative, by the way.
Yeah. Fair enough. But I think we'll gain some good insight into Eric's mind here as he pilots Prism and tells us a little bit about what the hero can do, what they're all about, what kind of people would like playing this hero, as Eric mentioned. So let's jump right into it. First question I have for you, Eric: tell me about what kind of player might be interested in playing Prism, and what about the hero or play style might be appealing.
Sure. So, as far as the kind of player that would be interested, it's definitely those kinds of players who either like a control based deck, as far as like the Aura Prism deck, and who really like high value trade off decks. And what I mean by high value trade off is a lot of cards that Prism has at her disposal, such as Heralds. They're very efficient on resource curve. They're very impactful in the game. You don't have a lot of dead weight cards in Prism as far as like kind of the main lists, and she has a fair amount of support in the sets currently, especially obviously mostly from Monarch. But she did get some nice tools in other sets like Everfest, like a lot of these blue auras,
Mm-hmm.
blue zero cost auras, and so she does fit that playstyle very good. She can be a more aggressive deck. I don't think those are going to be the players that really are like super pumped to play a hero like Prism.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
If there are better
that
choices
being
out there
said,
than
I
Prism,
think there are better
if you're going
choices.
aggro, yeah.
Yeah, I think players that like more control setup board state. Prism is very good at like making a board state here, and so setting up with different auras and spectral
Mm-hmm.
shields and such. And so I think those are the kind of players that will probably be more gravitating towards Prism.
Nice.
These are longer games. You're very rarely gonna close out a Prism CC game like within your first like 15 or 20 minutes. It's gonna be probably a longer game, but Prism is extremely flexible, and so that's totally okay.
Yep.
I think the play style, as far as appealing, it's just very. I think it's like the right amount of intensive, and what I mean by that is like you're not playing Kano where like you're running stuff at instant speed, but like you need to do things so perfectly or so highly tuned with a ton
Right.
of reps to do well with Kano. But Prism like has the same innate ability to be able to play a lot of things at instant speed, such as your yellow forecast auras.
Yep.
But she's able to also take up a more kind of she's able to quickly build board state as opposed to a lot of the heroes have to slowly build up small advantages. Prism does that, but sometimes these small advantages are really fat mercifuls or odes or parables, and she's able to really stop what the opponent is doing while also being proactive with their own game plan, right? And
Yep.
so I really do think that is quite appealing. The give and take, the ability to play it to your opponent's turn is also very like really only Kano does that to a higher degree. But Prism is the kind of the second hero in mind that if you do like doing things on their turn, your ability is an instant. You have yellow auras that are instant, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of. I pointed at the heralds there. I meant the aura. I
Yeah.
meant the auras over here.
Instant
I know what I'm
heralds
doing.
on the opponent's turn. Yeah, no.
Exactly.
Auras only. Yeah.
That's kind of what I think are
Yeah.
the
And
main pros of Prism.
makes a lot of sense. She gives you that exposure to being able to play instants on your opponent's turn, which is always something that a lot of new players kind of they gravitate towards because it's exciting. It gives you an extra
Mhm.
layer that you can look forward
Layer
to.
of depth, yeah.
Exactly, and she's not as far as Kano, like you said, because most of the time she's only playing like one thing on your opponent's turn,
Mhm.
like one aura, pitch 4/4, So yeah, I
Yep.
totally agree with that analysis, and she's flexible, like you said. So multiple game plans. She can lean towards the aggro, not really common, but she can do it if you want her to. All
Mhm.
right, next question. Tell me about the different builds floating around the meta right now. I know there is
Okay.
kind of like Spectra versus Aura versus Herald, I should say. Sorry, there's like kind of like a spectrum there, but is there a sweet spot that kind of works best?
Yeah, so we're at an interesting part of the meta right now. Now we're still waiting on the May 2nd
Ban and
BNR
restriction.
announcements. Yeah,
Yeah.
ban and restriction announcement. And so based on that, things might change. Would they hit Prism? I don't think so. I think she has a ton of natural counters as far as very hyper aggressive go wide decks that do well into Prism. Talk more about that later. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't think there's anything in her kit that really needs that it really warrants it, especially when you have heroes like Starvo and Viserai running around where there's some obvious issues there as far as unfairness and brokenness before Prism. So she's a bit more of a safer hero in the meta as far as power level. I think that as far as the builds go, there's a much heavier control aura based build, whereas you play all the auras. So you play all of the blue auras, the Pierce Reality, Passing Mirage, Haze Bending, Shimmers, and then you play all the yellow auras. And then you essentially play a bunch of D reacts, you block up, you
Mm-hmm.
build auras, build board state, and then attack with all your auras, essentially, is really, really the idea. And this is more like a control leaning Prism build. However, inherently speaking, these auras do, like the yellow auras don't block, the blue auras block for two. So you really have to balance it out with a lot of three block cards and a lot of D-Reacts.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the first one. The second one is a slightly more aggressive Prism list, which might side out some auras into specific matchups. I wouldn't say it's like a different build of Prism. I think with Prism, there's a fair consensus on like the obvious cards. Her pool is not very big, like
Right.
a lot of the like Guardian or something like that, right? There's not that many options available to Prism. She only has about two sets of support, and so Monarch and Everfest.
Mm-hmm.
So that is kind of where it stands. There's just very
Yep.
obvious choice. I think the key detect cards are really where it comes into play with kind of guiding her playstyle and her flexibility as far as more of a hybrid build. Some
Yeah.
of those cards include Command and Conquers, Pummels, any kind of red D reacts, any kind of red heralds, miragings, fractals, things like that. And you're able to add those to increase the level of defensiveness or aggressiveness of the deck specifically.
Yeah.
Speaking here, this build I have in front of me. So it's obviously most of the are the one off cards. I didn't want to fit like every single block of
Yeah.
three, and so this build briefly is one I ran at Pro. So I ran Prism once at ProQuest. I played two ProQuests, ran Prism one of them. This deck I went 6-0 in Swiss, and I ended up losing in semis, I think. So I top four with this list, and I thought it was quite clean. And I think actually in a meta where Starvo is less popular, and I'm able to take out like cards like this, like yellow unmovables, which I
Right.
don't have here in the list. You're able to get a couple more slots for some more flexible tools to build around, which is quite nice. But I think the build that I ran here, I actually ran 5D reacts, so sinks and fates, which
Mm-hmm.
are mainly there for rune blades, so Viserai and such,
Right.
and decks that do a lot of 0 for 4s, just 4 power in general. It's like one of those breakpoints. Prism does not have a lot of armor to block with. The footsteps are useful, but it does cost one resource to actually pump it up. And so if you need the
Yeah.
resources for something else, I did actually run the five. The five, would I make the fates another fate to make 6? It really depends. I did run CNCs, 2 CNCs, I believe. Good in the mirror because it pops for Phantasm
Mm-hmm.
because it is a 6 power. I did also run the 2 yellow pummels, as you can see right here. They did actually come in clutch versus Viserai and Akatsu, which was a slightly worse matchup before the blue auras. Mm, so I do recommend those if you want to be a bit more of an aggressive deck.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything else was pretty self-explanatory. I didn't run the Pierce Realities. That's one thing I will mention. Like you have your standard blue auras, Protection, Triumph, Ravage, Herald,
Yeah.
and then Shimmer's Passing Haze. I didn't run Pierce Reality. I instead of Pierce Reality, I ran slightly more yellows with the yellow pummels, and that was kind of my choice to bring the deck a bit more aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And everything else is fairly standard in this list. 3 Celestials, 3 of the main Heralds, Soul Shields, all of the 4 cost auras. My reds were, I believe it was 1 red War Tune and then 3 Metamorph. Metamorph is just such a good card as far as
Hmm.
flexibility because it only costs 1. You can play it off Tunic, and if they pop it and you have a Herald, an aura out,
Yeah.
you just get a copy. That's also quite strong. I
Yeah.
was able to flash out an aura at least in 2 of my games, and by flash out I mean that in response to this actually popping at instant speed, you play an aura that resolves, then
Yeah.
Metamorph resolves, that breaks, and then copies that aura. And I was able to do that in 2 or 3 separate games,
Yeah.
and it's a
Sneaky
very very
stuff.
strong tactic.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people just end up taking the 7 too. So that's also something to note. Anything else
Hmm.
in the build? I do have Raging Onslaughts, Herald Judgments. Those are kind of tech cards.
Hmm.
Herald Judgments mainly for Katsu and Chain,
Right.
to kind of hurt their banish because Katsu banishes off that hero skill, and then Chain obviously Soul Shackles, and then the Raging Onslaughts are mainly for the mirror. I'll talk a little bit
Hmm.
later about like cards that I may or may not add for like the
Yeah.
newer, like if something happened, but that's kind of what I have in front of me in
Yeah.
as far as like the
And
different builds. Like these are the things you can do. Like these are the things you can mess around with to
yeah,
change your kind of hybridness of
kind of
the
the
build.
little pockets you can mess with, right? Because hybrid is all. I mean, Prism is basically a hybrid hero when you're talking about auras versus the heralds. You don't
Hmm.
lean 100% into one of them typically. You
Hmm.
usually go for some kind of nice hybrid. So I think you've shown that very beautifully here, and that leads us into our next question actually very well. We're going to talk about key cards in these builds. So you've kind of talked a lot
Yep.
about it, but I'll just rehash the question. What key
Yep.
cards make up the different builds? So you've kind of touched
Yep.
upon that a little bit. But we can talk about the equipment. We can talk about the core cards
Or
and possible
yep.
sideboards here. I know you talked a little bit, but we can maybe get some more
Yeah,
details out of you.
I didn't go that much. I didn't go that much in detail about
Yeah,
that part, but like as far as like the key cards, very briefly, I think the key cards for me in my matchups were the pummels came into play with the heralds and the CNCs. I don't have the CNCs out here, but the
yeah.
CNCs are on the list. Um, those came into play quite a bit, especially versus tempo decks. I would say those were key
Hmm.
cards in a
And
lot of Rune
the
Blade heavy metas.
right, and the pummel would target mostly Herald of Erudition and the CNC, I
Yes,
guess. Yeah.
yes, Herald of Erudition and CNC. I did both of them. They were
Hmm.
both very very good, and they definitely led to me building heavier advantages I wouldn't have been able to. So that was definitely like a key combo of the deck. The Miraging was another MVP as far as a key card.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get out. It's a lot of the time to just take the 7 because they know there's nothing they can do about it. But if they take the 7, you could follow up with another one. You can follow up with a red War Tune Herald, a yellow
Yeah.
War Tune Herald, a blue War Tune Herald. The red, yellow, and blue War Tune Heralds are all just so good. They're just so good. One
Yeah.
cost heralds are very good.
Well
I would
stacked
hesitate to
cards.
call
Yeah.
them key, but they are good cards.
Hmm.
Those were the kind of main key cards that I would mention in this kind of build.
Yeah.
I know other matchups like Arclight Sentinel is a key card in the chain matchup. Like there's
Right.
like specific matchups where there might be a key card, but like the
Hmm.
pummels, the CNCs, and all the one cost that you can give go again with either a yellow pitch from Luminaris or Ode to Wrath, which also gives your heralds go again without needing the yellow pitch, which is something that a lot of people forget and don't realize that Ode to Wrath just gives you your heralds
Right.
go again without needing the yellow pitch for the Luminaris. So
Hmm.
those were the ones that I would say outperformed my expectations. I think the Fates and Sinks were fine. They did what they were supposed to. Soul Shield was good. I actually didn't see any Prism mirrors at that particular point, so these
Mm-mm.
onslaughts were just
The
waste of
onslaughts
space.
weren't
But
needed. Yeah.
yeah, and also the Cataclysm also is very good for breaking heralds because it is a light attack. It is not a
Right.
illusionist attack, so that was good. Um,
Yeah.
the Shimmers is a very good as far as the blues that outperformed. I'd say Shimmers would be the one. A lot of people need to feel that they need to target this, especially because it keeps rolling on. But
Yeah.
because you know that, you can play around it, and it's very easy to set up this very nice clawback hand where you can just play the Shimmers, assume they're probably going to pop it, and like go on your merry way with whatever you're trying to do. And
Hmm.
so that probably outperformed also. As far as the for like equipment and like core possible sideboard. The
Yeah.
equipment I didn't bring out yet, but we do have the Luminaris being the main weapon, of course. This is kind of like the weapon that you have to do because it's like
It's
a
the only
matter of,
choice, pretty much, right?
yeah, you kind of need Luminaris to really get most of this deck to work.
Yeah,
This is not one of those Iris decks where you have a ton of blues, you just tank up and then swing with Iris of Reality for 4 go again
right.
with your Spectral Shields. Different kind of build. Don't really like it. As
Mm-hmm.
far as equipment goes, there are different kind of options you can do. So, like in the arm slot, you can run something like an Iron Rod Gauntlet, which I
Yeah,
just kind of moved out right here. So you can run like an Iron Rod Gauntlet. You can run the Null Rune
or Iron
Glove if you're
Ironhide, I
taking.
guess, right?
Sorry.
Can't see it too well,
Iron
but
Hide.
Ironhide,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
to make use of
this is
that
an
pitch
Iron
with
Hide.
the Phantasmal Footsteps, I guess, pairs very well with that.
Mhm. Yep. Null Rune for Runeblade, of course. You could run Dreamweavers. Dreamweavers is an option. This deck doesn't really live or die by hitting one of the
Yeah,
heralds, like by like not hitting one of the like breakpoints on that. So I
right.
wouldn't say it's super useful there, but you can run it if you'd like. Headpiece is usually a skull cap is like the main idea,
Mm-hmm.
and the reason you run the skull cap is because you need the extra armor into Runic Reclamation, as
Yeah,
among other cards. Runic is just it's not fun. It's not a fun card to play against.
yeah.
Um,
Speaking of
and that's
headpieces, I mean,
yeah,
sorry to cut you off, but I guess we did see a new. You're about to talk about it. Good. So the
about to
crown.
talk about it. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yes.
Crown was in my list. This did come out in Everfest. I used it a whole lot of zero games.
Mm-hmm.
I use Skullcap every game. The reason I use Skullcap every game is because I was facing an aggro matchup or Starvo every single game, and so I
Yikes.
wasn't at liberty to actually bring out the crown. I would bring out the crown into like the mirror and maybe like Oldhim and stuff like that, where I have a lot more space to Bravo Showstopper, stuff like that, where I have more space to actually not need the armor. So I'm not against the Rune Blade, so I don't have to worry about Reclamation. And I'm not into Starvo, so I don't have to worry about losing turn 3. So when you have those kind of flexibilities here, you could play the Crown, and this enables you to get the mythical triple aura turn, which I still
Yep.
have never seen in my life. Um,
Yep.
Honestly, even double auras were super hard for me that tournament, but I think I
Yeah.
probably got one. I actually didn't get one down once. I didn't actually get a double aura turn. So Crown is one of those things where the draw, like it has Arcane Barrier 1, which is kind of whatever, but the problem is you can't do it on their turn. You have to do it on your turn.
Yeah.
And that means you can't really use it that well with your instant auras here, your Ode,
Right.
Merciful, and Parable in Genesis,
Right.
or your Arclight for that matter. And because you have to do it on your turn, it's your action phase, I should say, is a lot less good than it could be. It also blocks for a whole lot of nothing. So if the meta is aggressive, I don't recommend playing Crown. If the meta slows down, Crown is great.
Right.
That's essentially Crown in a nutshell. Yeah. So and then Skullcap we were mentioning kind of like the runic and as well as aggressive on hits, especially into stuff like Katsu. It's
Mm-hmm.
very nice to have that extra piece of armor along with the footsteps.
Right.
You can also use it to block those smaller attacks that aren't go wide. Even Briar, that's something that you can do if the channel mount is not up and running and their attacks are coming in for 4. That's something that you might want to use with like a snatch. So like blocking with a blue, they're all 2 costs. Oh, sorry, they're all 2 blocks.
Right.
So you like throw in a skull cap and a blue, and they'll block like a snatch for 4 or whatever, which is quite nice. I think that those are kind of the only 2 main headpieces. The boots is always footsteps. It's always footsteps.
Yeah.
I don't even know what. Like I think that's like it's just too good
Right.
for Prism as far as if they pop your Herald, you get to pay 1 to say no,
Your
I'm good.
turn isn't
I'm
over
good.
at that
I'm good.
point, right? Yeah.
Turn is still okay. Yeah, because it's something like you pitch a yellow, you War Tune, you have a blue aura in hand, you
Yeah.
use the other floating for the footsteps, and still get to play your blue aura. It's
Yep.
just very efficient.
It's efficient. Yeah.
And yeah, so I don't think there's really another
Like
footsteps
there's
that I've
no,
considered running.
not even like a budget option that you would suggest for those. They're pretty unique, aren't they? Yeah. They kind of do
Yeah,
exactly what Prism needs to keep her
it's
turn.
very
Yeah.
it's very similar to like Kano and the fact that Striders are too good. Like it
Yeah.
makes the deck. And so that's kind of the one piece that is quite important. I didn't consider running another boots.
Yeah.
As far as the chest piece, there was kind of the talk between Tunic and Vestige,
Mm-hmm.
Vestige's Soul. I landed on Tunic much to the reason of other people, whereas you can use a Tunic counter and a blue to play a yellow aura on their turn and get
Right.
your Tunic counter back on your turn, right? To get like to float to move the die essentially once. So you get a free usage out of your or out of your
Mm,
resource there.
that's fair. Yeah.
And also the tunic, like in a pinch, you can use it for your footsteps. You can use it for pitching. I don't know. Let's say you really, really want to get a red out of your hand and you want to play Soul Shield. You pitch a red and use your tunic counter, and you can
Yeah.
get Soul Shield out. Uh, with unmovables, they were used before, like pitching a yellow and a tunic
Mm,
counter to use an unmovable if you absolutely have to. Same thing with pummel. A lot of the times where when I was attacking for a CNC or a Herald of Erudition, usually a CNC, I would pitch three, have one floating with the CNC, and then have the tunic floating, and then a pummel in arsenal or
yeah.
pummel in hand. That was very good. That worked a couple times actually, and so
Mm,
because of all those reasons, it was quite good as far as the
yeah.
tunic goes.
So would
Vestige
you
is like
even side the vestige then, or
I
just
didn't even
tunic?
run it in the
Okay,
list.
so tunic
I
is
didn't
just
even
kind
run it in the
of
list.
eclipsing it in pretty much
Yeah,
every scenario here.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The Vestige build runs on Tome of Divinities, which I don't run.
Yeah.
The reason why I don't run them is they can be good, but they're less consistent, and it's a matter of like, yeah, you get something in Soul, Vestige gets turned on, you pitch a blue for Tome, you draw three cards and pray. Like it can be good. It was good in the past, but
Yeah.
this build as it currently is so much more consistent that there's really little reason for me to go back to Vestige. It has the same armor. Tunic is guaranteed. Vestige is not. I have to get something in Soul. If I'm playing auras, I don't
Yeah.
always get to put
A little
something in
less
Soul.
likely. Yeah.
Yeah, and so a Vestige is another option you can use in Prism. Combine it with Tome of Divinity, and you're off to the races. It's quite nice when it actually lands,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of the other thing you could put there. There's also sure there's other things you could do with that slot,
Yeah.
but we could talk about that in like the more budget conscious kind of player.
Yeah. For sure. Okay, let's jump into some of the matchups, I guess. So, what matchups does Prism struggle against overall, and what would you consider her favorable matchups?
Yeah, for sure. So especially this build, the more aura centric build with a little bit of aggro sideboard struggles the most against hyper aggressive decks and decks that either go really, really wide and you're not really able to adequately cover all of the block because you don't have armor. A lot of your cards either don't block too much, or block too little.
Yeah.
So you don't have like all your three blocks are pretty much your heralds, and you really want to be pitching or using a lot of them sometimes. So it gets a little bit awkward. Katsu used to be a really bad matchup, but then the blue auras actually help quite a bit.
Mm,
Like blocking with your whole hand, placing a blue aura and passing, it's quite good. The issue with Katsu is that it's very easy for Kastu to swing a Kadachi, hit one of your auras, and pass at the very end of their turn. So they could do their
right.
entire line, ignore what you're doing, pitch Kadachi yourself, and then Kadachi an aura.
Yep.
Right? It's very easy. It's very
Very
easy to do
cheap
that.
weapon
And,
to use. Yeah.
mhm. uh, but I did face one Katsu actually in Swiss, and by the good graces of the CNC pummel Jesus, I was able to really swing the momentum because Herald of
Yeah.
Eruditions, Katsu doesn't run a lot of armor. Eruditions and CNCs really stunted the turns, and you can really claw back with a more aggressive variant of the auras. So you're not playing as much to build auras; you're playing more to like build an aura and attack, and kind of like mix the two.
Right.
Um, Lightning Briar used to be a horrible, horrible matchup when
Just
Ball Lightning and
very
everything else was
aggressive.
built. Plunder Run, yeah, very, very wide, very hard to contain. Auras don't do anything. You need blocking cards into
Yeah.
that build. I think Briar nowadays is doable um, as far as the channel mount Briar or like a weakened Lightning Briar.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's super unfavorable. I think it's still Briar favored, probably about 60-40. Briar favored 60-40 as far as
Yeah.
like the channel mount Briar, because 7 is so good because they can channel mount and turn all their attacks into poppers, right? Pretty much. However, getting out the channel, you could respond with a whole bunch of stuff. Like if they're channel passing or whatever, you can like play an aura and maybe force them to attack the aura or something like that. There is
Mm-hmm.
some counterplay, but I think a
Yeah.
good Prism can win. It's just not favored. So I think that's probably one of Prism's worst matchups at the moment. It's going to be Channel Mount Briar,
Mm-hmm.
and for good reason. I think Chain is tricky but doable. It's close to 50-50 depending on how you're building it. If you're building a more fatigue strat, unless the chain is very, very good and practiced into playing into fatigue, which not a lot of them are with like the belittle package and less blood debt. It's not like the ye old seeds build and
Mm-hmm.
of yonder. So
Yeah.
I think it's definitely a tricky matchup because they can run Time snap potions, get them out, get the action point, negate the Arclight Sentinel. But a lot of the times, if you're just chilling with Arclight for the late game, like 5, 6, 7 shackles, you could do a lot of damage to their plan, especially if they keep banishing time snaps and stuff. So tricky matchup, not impossible.
Yeah.
Viserai is also probably slightly more favored to Viserai, slightly, because it really depends on what they're able to draw. Runic Reclamation is, again, super good into Prism.
Yeah.
You really need to have like these zero cost D reacts to combine with a 3 block to block it out, Skull Cap, Soul Shield and Skull Cap, something like that. But it's very, very detrimental if they have like the early ones that like are able to stunt your pressure. But I would say it's still close to 50-50. It really kind of depends. I don't think there are any other really unfavorable matchups. I'm not really going to talk about Starvo favorable or unfavorable because we don't really know where that deck's going to be in about a couple
Yeah.
weeks.
What do you think about decks who run a lot of 6 attack cards? Like we're talking about like Brute,
Yeah, like Rhinar, Bravo, decks like that.
yeah.
So it's interesting because before these auras came out, these blue auras, Prism didn't have a lot of flexibility as far as the card pool to get around that, to get around like, oh, everything can pop. But now you have cards like Miraging, which say, I dare you, pop it, I dare you, right? So it is a little bit better. I think Rhinar probably has an easier time into Prism because of cards like Sand Sketch Plan and Scabskins can
Just more action points.
roll action points, and when you're running like a claw whatever, you can like just start clawing things.
Just tear down the auras little by little, I guess. Yeah.
It's not fun. I don't think Rhinar really does super well into Prism from what I've seen, because there are still some things that Prism could do, like some nasty heralds that Rhinar really doesn't like.
Yeah.
And it's Rhinar so card hungry that a lot of times they don't necessarily want to block. So I think it's probably slightly Rhinar favored. But the thing is, every other deck like Viserai and
Rhinar to a pulp,
beating the shit out of Rhinar lately. That it's not as hard, but I can see a world. Yeah, I can see a world where decks like Rhinar can actually like get the advantage. As far as like what this deck's strong against, it shits on Bravo. A Guardian in general just shits on Oldhim and Bravo Showstopper. There's like, you could tool your deck pretty heavily with like beltings and lead the charges like against the old Prism.
Yeah.
Even then it was super difficult. Like now you've just added a whole lot of more auras that are just like super hard to deal with. I think Everfest made the matchup worse than it was. It was already a bad matchup. And so don't like that. I think it is slightly favored into Dash. I think Dash can do well with like good high octane turns, but I think Prism does what Dash wants to do better as far as like setting up board state. I think Prism is just better at it because there is more to put on the board.
Right.
Whereas, and then you have tools like Soul Shield that are integrated in their kit. Whereas like, oh yeah, you want to attack with Zipper Hit? Yeah, I get Soul Shield with that. Like, you still get board state because of Soul. So I think Prism is kind of like Dash 2.0 in that respect, where you just do it a little bit better.
Yeah.
And Dash, I think, struggles a little bit with that kind of play style. As far as the other decks, I think I'm not going to go through literally all of them, but I think in general against Prism does good into slower decks because Prism is a better slower deck. Doesn't do good against very hyper aggressive decks or decks that can target it very well, like Rune Blades with Rune Reclamation. Doesn't do as well. But I would say the worst matchup right now, on average, is Briar. Not to say it's not winnable, just I think that's her worst matchup at the moment.
Awesome. That was great. That was very detailed. Very nice to look into kind of just generally what Prism does well against and what she's weak against. Aggressive, obviously, being very difficult to deal with if you have no block auras, plus you're trying to set up. It's very hard to do that while you're on the back foot, blocking snatches, blocking these really, very aggressive go wide strategies. So let's move on to maybe some of the cards in terms of the attack lines and what you're kind of looking to do with certain hands on Prism. So what are those key attack lines that you're looking for? And what does Prism really build towards turn by turn?
Sure. So as far as key attack lines, in general, it will vary widely depending on your hand, but generally you want to go first. The reason you want to go first is for that double aura. So I guess a key attack line or a key board state line is you have one of these like 4 cost auras. So let's say you have like a Merciful Retribution. So what you want to do is you want to pitch with 2 cards, maybe a blue and a yellow. You pitch for Merciful, and then your last card is one of these blue auras, Shimmer's Passing Haze, or if you're running Pierce Reality, Pierce Reality. You just run those and you pass. You get automatic board state with a strong aura and another blue aura, and then you just pass. So that's like your ideal turn 1. Generally, if you can't do that, playing Unaura turn 1 and then arsenaling a card is also fine. And like a D-React, maybe one of the red ones, or a Soul Shield is also quite good. And that's why you try to go first in almost every matchup. Yeah. What you could do going second, interesting to note, is because you have a lot of instant cards, you can do it when they pass priority to end. This is tricky because if they still have an action point, you play the aura, they can swing with a weapon or an attack to pop the aura. However, if they don't have an action point, this is where you say, haha, I got you. And you smirk.
Yeah,
and then you play down your
interaction, because aura. If the opponent says, okay, I'm going to the end phase, or I'm going to arsenal something, and then you say, wait a sec, I want to play an aura, and then they can be like, oh, well, I changed my mind. I don't want to go to end phase anymore. They can still go back to their action point.
It gets awkward.
Yeah.
Especially for a newer player. It gets awkward.
Or timings there, exactly. Yeah.
But generally, if they don't have an action point, like if they did something, you blocked, they go again and they attack with a weapon to face, you take the damage, and they pass to end, like they're saying, okay, I'm going to arsenal pass. Before they arsenal, right? They're passing to end phase, then they arsenal during their end phase. They don't arsenal before their end phase. You can't arsenal in your action phase.
Nope.
And then is when you actually play one of your instant auras. Generally, you're playing a full set of all of them at the moment. Or you play Arclight too. If you have 2 blues and Arclight, still a nice aura to play early. As far as your attack lines, what you generally want to be doing is you want to be pitching a yellow, if you can, almost every turn. Like maybe the Celestial Cataclysm, and try to come in with either one of the 2 costs or 1 cost auras, right? You gain the go again, and then you slam down a blue aura, or you pitch a blue to slam down a 4, and then you attack with that aura because you have a go again from the Luminaris, because you have because you have a yellow in pitch, right? So pitching a yellow to either Prism to create a Spectral Shield if you have Soul, pitching a yellow for whatever is important just to get into Soul, just so all of your illusionist attacks have go again. Important to note, all your auras are illusionist attacks, so that's how you do the 1-1-1-1-1, and you flip everything and you just go like bullet time on them. You machine gun them. So that's kind of a very common attack line. You pitch a yellow, you play a Herald, you play an aura, a blue aura, and pass because that doesn't have go again. But if you can play the instant auras, you still have your action point. So you pitch, play the one of the yellow auras,
or something like that. Yeah.
So an example attack line, I guess, if you pitch a yellow, play Red Wartune Herald. You're coming in for 7, right? Let's say they pop it. So you have 1 floating, right? You use the 1 floating, Phantasmal Footsteps. You gain the action point back. So you have 2 cards in hand. Let's say you have no arsenal. Let's say it's pretty early in the game, right? You have no arsenal, 2 cards in hand. But let's say you have, or either you have an arsenal or you have a tunic counter, right? Either one. This applies to both scenarios. So let's say you have a tunic counter and 2 cards. You pitch a blue, you use the tunic counter, you have 4 resources, you play Parable of Humility, play it down, you attack with Parable of Humility for 1. Let's go again. Then you pass. So that's a very a very nice 4-card play with Tunic. And that's kind of what Tunic enables for like a pretty basic hit with Herald or a pass. Hitting with 2 aura Heralds is less common, but can happen with like double War Tune or Miraging. It's just an example of like a very common attack line.
And after attacking with the aura, then drop down one of the blue auras, right? As your finisher.
If you had a blue one in Arsenal, then you drop down your blue aura. So always remember, once you play the yellow aura, always attack with it if you can. Then you play, because once you play the blue aura, you don't. These don't have go again.
Turns pretty much over.
They're not instants. Yeah, they're not instants. They don't have go again. You have to play them and pass. Another thing is like the interactions are very important. So if you have an Ode to Wrath out and all your heralds have go again, you can now pitch a blue and get. You can pitch a blue. You have Ode to Wrath out. Play Herald of Triumph, right? Let's say they just block. They don't pop it. You can then, that gains go again because of the Ode to Wrath. Then you could attack with Red Wartune Herald. Sure, why not? And then you attack with Ode to Wrath after that because that also gets go again because you don't. Oh, sorry, that doesn't gain go again. So you finish
Right.
your turn on Ode to Wrath.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you pitch the blue, you attack with a 2-cost Herald, attack with a red Herald or another Wartune Herald. Then you finish your turn by attacking with Ode to Wrath.
Mm-hmm.
It only gives illusionist attack action cards go again, so it
Right.
doesn't give the
So the
aura go again.
auras will not gain it. Right. Yeah.
Ode to Wrath doesn't give your auras go again. Only Luminaris does that because that's illusionist attacks. So that's important. So making sure your sequencing is right as far as when you're attacking with your auras and when you're attacking with your heralds is quite important.
Right.
Another key line is when someone is hitting you with an ability that makes you discard from hand, um, at least like 1 or 2 or 3 cards. Like Starvo did this a lot. What
Mm-hmm.
you can do is in response, you can pitch a bunch of cards to, let's say you block with a card, then in response, maybe you pitch 2 cards and play a yellow aura.
Yeah.
They can hit the aura, sure, but at least you don't discard 2 cards because those cards don't block. A lot of the cards don't block anyways, like a lot of the yellow auras, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the
Yeah.
last one I can mention is how to use Crown of Reflection,
Right.
because I don't think a lot of people actually have experience using this card.
Yep. For sure.
And so what you want to do with Crown of Reflection is it's a little bit tricky, right? Because if you have to destroy it and then have a target. So you put an aura from hand with cost less or equal. So a lot of the times the target for this is a Spectral Shield. A Spectral Shield is a 0-cost aura for all intents and purposes, right?
Yep.
So you're able to destroy a Spectral Shield to get one of your blue auras out. So what you want to do is you want to do something, Herald, Yellow Aura, whatever, and then you can create a Spectral Shield off Prism,
Yep.
maybe off Herald of Protection hitting, something like that. You attack with a Spectral Shield if you have a yellow, assuming you have a yellow and pitch with a go again for Luminaris. Then you Crown of Reflection that Spectral Shield, and you place a blue. It has to be from hand too.
Mm-hmm.
Your blue aura has to be from hand, right? It's not
Yeah. Not from.
it's not just from anywhere. It has to
Yeah.
be from hand. So then you keep the blue in your hand, and you play Shimmers of Silver and pass. For that magical triple aura, you have to essentially play. You have to play multiple, so you have to get down like a
Mm-hmm.
yellow. I think a yellow, a blue, and a blue, right? So
Yeah.
if you play a
Exactly.
yellow,
Yeah.
you play a yellow aura, you pitch for the Ode to Wrath,
Yeah.
and then you will use the. Let's say you pitch 2 blues for Ode to Wrath.
Mm-hmm.
You have 2 floating. You create a Spectral Shields with Shimmers.
Yeah.
You use Crown of Reflection. It's an instant. Doesn't use your action points. You use it. You replace your Spectral Shield with your first blue aura,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
And then you play the second blue aura, which actually takes up that action point.
Yeah.
So you've just done instant action, and that's the triple aura dream.
Yep.
That's essentially what it is. That's about it, I think. Those are like kind of the main
Yeah.
ideas of stuff you want to be doing with this deck.
Makes a lot of sense. And is Cataclysm something you play pretty much whenever you have three points in your soul shield, or your 3 points in soul, I should say?
Listen, I've never once got this thing off.
Okay.
I've been in situations where I drew it. I had 0, 1, 2.
Yep.
I've had 6 in soul and never saw the stupid card.
Yeah.
Like it's just no. Like yes, if you can, no problem. But in those kinds of games, soul management is probably not a super big deal because they're taking your stuff and coming back with more. Like they're taking your damage, allowing you to get soul, and they're coming back with more. And so in those kinds of games, like you might not be able to wait for Celestial. You might need to be using your soul to make Spectrals to start blocking or something, right?
Yeah.
So no blocks for 3. It's a yellow. I mainly just pitch it or block with it. That's the main.
Very
or
good into the mirror.
It's good in the
well.
mirror.
Exactly. Yep. Cool.
Yep.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much for the breakdown. And
no problem. If love the channel.
Love the channel. Thank you. It's always nice to hear from a fan. So, if someone wants to take this deck to a kind of competitive level here, someone who's watching this video, they're liking what they're seeing, they want to try Prism out, what kind of cards in this list here are a must-buy for anyone trying out Prism?
Must-buy.
Yeah. If they want to be somewhat competitive. I'm not talking about like the Blitz deck type of deck.
No, that's fair.
Yeah.
So the only like must-buy as far as equipment goes, as far as your expensive card, is your Footsteps. You don't need Tunic. It makes the deck a lot better. You don't need it. You could run cards such as like Heart and Crosstrap for attack actions to have two less to give you like a free herald. Essentially gives you the two up front.
Yeah.
I think blood drop brocade is another option that gives you the one floating as an instant if you've dealt or deal damage. I think something along those lines. Sorry, if you've dealt damage or taken damage, that kind of thing. And so if you've
Yeah.
taken damage, you can crack brocade, and you essentially get that tunic counter at instant speed.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a one-off. It just doesn't have armor. It's essentially it does the same thing at the same speed. You just don't get the armor.
Yeah.
And it's not reoccurring. It's a one-time, but still not bad.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of two pieces there.
I guess
Skullcap's
Luminaris
not
is probably
necessary,
a
but
big
Luminaris
one.
is a must buy.
Yeah.
It's fairly cheap. Like the good thing about Monarch is there's a limited and there's a lot of unlimited, and hell, there's a lot of first ed apparently. So
Yeah.
go pick yourself up some first ed if you want. But
Mm-hmm.
all the heralds from all the auras from Everfest and Monarch, I think, are a must buy, which includes the Parables, Ode, and Merciful are rares. Genesis and Arclight are majestics, but they're not super expensive.
Right.
Soul Shield's another majestic, which it's very, very useful. I would probably recommend it highly. I wouldn't say it's a must buy. You can just run more D reacts. Things like yellow unmovables are very comparable. It just costs one extra.
Yeah.
And can come in for 7 from the arsenal. So it's comparable. You can replace Soul Shield with unmovable. Soul Shield is just more efficient. Everything else is a common and rare as far as heralds go, other than Erudition. Erudition is a must buy. It is too good.
Yeah.
Even decks that don't want to block, they block this card. Drawing 2 cards would dominate. You don't let that hit.
Don't let that
You
through.
just don't do it. You just don't do it. You're gonna regret it.
Yep.
And that's it as far as like, and then the Everfest auras, I kind of mentioned already. The blue ones, they're all Shimmers is a majestic. I would recommend picking those up. It's the best blue aura. I'll just say it. It's just the best blue aura.
Yeah.
It is. You can do nothing. Attack with Shimmers every single turn, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You don't need any cards.
Yeah.
And it's very, very good. I think there's nothing else that's crazy. The Miraging is a majestic. It's very good, but if you don't want to buy it, you can run a full set of War Tune Heralds.
Right.
That is a replacement. Anything else that's crazy? If you don't want to buy Crown, you don't have to. It is a majestic, but I think the Everfest Majestics are fairly cheap anyways.
Even the cold foil versions, if you want that.
Yep.
If you want the shiny
totally
versions.
true.
Yep.
Celestial is also a majestic. Celestial Cataclysm from Monarch. Again, the Monarch Majestics aren't too expensive.
Yeah.
Super not necessary. You don't really need, unless you know you're going to see a ton of mirrors. I wouldn't say this is necessary for like a somewhat competitive deck.
Yeah.
That's about it, I think. Everything else is like commons and rares for the most part. CNCs are not like, I added them, but they were a side tech. Like you can still pummel the heralds. You might not, like there's less options for pummel. You might not want to run pummel.
Yeah.
But if you could pick some CNCs, cheaper ones up from like the new historic packs, I think it's what's called the history packs.
History
whatever,
pack
the white border
one,
ones.
Volume 1, yeah.
So if you could pick up some the cheaper ones, it's a very good card for a lot of different decks. I wouldn't say it's a must-have, but it's a very good card in general, and it does work in Prism. It does do some good work. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it's nice to see that a lot of the cards that are key to this deck are fairly cheap, which is a great reason to play Prism.
The low end of this deck is very cheap. The high end of this deck is stupidly expensive with all the cold foil auras, with all the extended art herald.
Yeah.
The high end of this deck is probably the most expensive deck as far as high end cards.
You've got Judge promos as well now that you can run
for
War
Judge
Tune.
Heralds.
Yeah, War Tune, Judgment,
War Tune.
Yeah.
You run a full play set of War Tune. You can run the Judgments on the side. You have cold foil, haze bending, passing, pierced reality.
You got all the cold foil, Ode to Wrath, Parable.
You have the extended art Herald of Eruditions.
It's true. If you're someone who loves bleeding out your deck, then Prism might be for you. But
Prism, cold foil, Luminaris.
The only thing that I would say is, like you said, a must-have that is expensive are the footsteps. Even unlimited, it's like $200. So that's probably the only one that's going to be running you back a bit. But as for the rest of the deck,
might be a bit cheaper, but yeah, you're right.
Maybe a little cheaper. Yeah, I'm talking about Canadian, so probably maybe 150 to 170 USD. But anyway, yeah, and because Prism is so kind of right now, she's doing very well in the meta. I think prices are a bit higher. Maybe not the right time to buy the footsteps, but
people like
point,
Prism. Like people like to play Prism. People main Prism. It's a very popular hero, just thematically speaking. and
Yep.
that also contributes a little bit to the price.
Yeah. 100%. Okay, so on to our final question of the interview. What are your overall thoughts on Prism in this current meta?
I'll answer this with the asterisk that the current meta, I'm assuming that's going to be a thing for the Pro Tour season,
Yes.
is a weakened Starvo and a weakened Viscerai.
Fair.
That's gonna be what I'm assuming.
Okay.
Given that, I'll say if nothing changes, if literally nothing changes, Prism is still a good Starvo counter. There are different Starvo builds that do a different amount of, like, there's the Casino Royale, the Yahtzee build, and then there's like a more control-y kind of Guardian build, right? That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
run stuff like Awakening. And so if nothing changes in the BNR, literally nothing, this deck still does well into Starvo. Um, doesn't do well into Rune Blades. It can win into Rune Blades.
Yeah.
It just doesn't do as well. I don't know how else to say
Mm-hmm.
that. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, Prism came to popularity mainly because of Starvo's rise to popularity in recent times, right? That was the idea. It doesn't
Yeah.
do good into super aggressive decks like maybe a Viscerai that just goes off, or like a Briar. It doesn't do well. Even Chain can be a difficult matchup if you
Mm-hmm.
can't fatigue. So it, assuming that happens, I think Prism will still be decently popular as a pick against Starvo. If Starvo is best deck, Prism gives you a really good shot into beating Starvos consistently. I think other than that, in the meta that I assume is what's going to be closer to what the Pro Tour meta is in May, I think that Prism, tuned correctly, depending on your build, is still a solid, like, high tier pick.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of the top three decks. I would say top three decks, along with maybe, I don't know, depends on kind of the hits to Viscerai, like the
Yeah.
hits to Starvo, different things. And I think Briar's up there. I think decks like Dash, decks like Lexi might rise a little bit.
Yeah. Maybe Katsu a
Even
little
maybe
bit.
Bravo, maybe Oldhim. I think if nothing, if what they do to Starvo doesn't hurt Oldhim too much, I think Oldhim will be a big deal. And if becomes a big deal, Prism becomes godly, because
Yeah. Yeah.
Prism absolutely dunks on Oldhim. I don't care what anyone's experiences are. I've seen a lot of that matchup, and I see very few Oldhims that are able to consistently break out of the Prism matchup. And
Yeah.
that's kind of how I see that. So if you see a lot more Guardians on the rise, Prism is good against Guardian, and I doubt Prism's going to be hit in the new BNR. I'd be very, very surprised. Um, I mean, nothing's impossible, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I'd be very surprised. And given that, I would say she's definitely a top three hero. It does take reps. There is a lot to remember. You can play this deck very poorly. Like
Yeah.
the floor for this deck is very low, in my opinion. It's the ceiling is quite high, but the floor is
Mm-hmm.
also low. Like, you need to really know your sequencing really well, as far as when to play auras, how to attack from, like, heralds, your pitch, like your D reacts, how to, like, adequately trade board state for damage is a very big deal as far as practice. And so, given that, it's not the easiest deck to pick up. It's not like Lightning Briar last meta, where,
Mm-hmm.
like, you could put two stones together, rub it in, and you're
And you're
playing
good.
Briar. Like, you're off to the races, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Prism's not like that
Not
at
to
all.
say
Yeah.
Prism is not like that. You'll notice a good Prism versus a not good Prism, or like a less practiced
Yeah.
Prism, I should say.
Yeah.
You'll notice real quick, as far as how they're doing it, how they're trading their life as a resource is probably the biggest thing, I would say. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I see it. I think
Nice.
she'll still be popular in meta, top three, maybe top four.
Yeah.
I would be remiss to think there'd be less than 15% of the meta playing her at Pro Tour if Starvo and Viserai are hit. I'd say at least 10 to 15% of the meta will
Mm-hmm.
be Prism, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but that would be my guess.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, that's all the questions I had for you, Eric. Thank you very much for sharing your insight. I know you
Thank
have some
you.
experience on this deck. I'll pass it on to
A
you
little
for any
bit.
final comments that you want to give.
Yeah. I'd like to give a shout out to Spark Genius. They've
Yeah.
got
Oh.
two
Oh.
they've got two very adequate co-creators, co-hosts,
It's
co-commentators, and
very nice of you.
co-compatriots.
Thank you.
No, but in all honesty, I think Prism is a very rewarding deck to learn, play, and it's a good deck to grow your game knowledge. And that is because you're doing a lot of things at instant speeds. You're doing sequencing, you're trading resources for life. You don't have any like super unfair broken cards that like ignore the fact that you can just play like an animal and like a bad animal, like not a good
A
animal,
bad
not like
animal.
you're playing super well.
It sounded like a
Like you're
compliment
just
there. Yeah.
no, like you can't just inch your way to victory here is what I'm saying. Is you can't just I've seen so many Starbowl games where they either misplay or they just have to rely on like, oh, I got Awakening, I guess I just win, even though I took 20 damage by accident, or like or they misplayed and they still come up with the victory because they're just so good. Like
Yeah.
the hero's just so good. Prism, one or two mistakes will just lose you the game. Straight up. Like if you missed an aura, if you took damage when you weren't supposed to, if you miss those efficiencies and they start stacking up. And so I think good Prism players are able to translate their skills quite well to other heroes because your skill set just broadens. And for that reason, I would definitely recommend anyone who hasn't tried Prism to at least give her a shot. She doesn't have to be your main, but it's very good to put some reps into her, kind of learn, if not how to play her, how to play against her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with that, I mean, I appreciate everyone for watching this. If they
Mm.
liked the content, feel free to leave a like, comment. Maybe is there something I'm missing? Do you like Prism? Do you not like Prism? Why or why not? Is there something I miss as far as cards that I could be adding or cards that might be more preferential with the new upcoming BNR announcements with the meta? And how are your experiences with Prism? Do you like her? Do you dislike her? Is your wallet empty because of her? Maybe.
All
Um,
of the above.
all of the above. Feel free to subscribe for notifications. Click the bell button. Follow us on Twitter for our weekly updates and content. We've got a massive slate of really good content, in my opinion. We've got a lot of special guests. We've got interviews slated. It's going to be fun times here at Spark of Genius. And with that, wherever you're watching in the world, have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Bye for now.